Welcome to the 4 p.m. session of Track 3 Crafting Community entitled How to Write a Book, Really. Before we begin, 1455 would like to thank our sponsors and panelists for their support and participation in the 2022 1455 Summer Festival. As a reminder, audience members are in listen-only mode. Chat and the Q&A functions are not available, but we do encourage you to keep these conversations going via social media. 1455 is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, please note that every Summer Festival session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand replay in the 1455 Attendee Hub a few hours after session conclusion. Lastly, in the event you encounter technical difficulties viewing this session, we suggest either reloading the page or clicking the back button on your browser and then rejoining the session. Now I'd like to turn the session over to our speakers to get started. Thank you and enjoy the session.
Hi, good people. My name is Rachel Heath, and I'm the curriculum director, got a new title, director for the Unicorn Authors Club. And I am here with...
I am Meenal Hadratwala, and I am the founder and the guiding coach of the Unicorn Authors Club. And we are here to talk to y'all about how to finish a book, really.
Yeah, and I love this title, and I'm wondering if you could tell us what is that really about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I called it that because there's a lot of advice about how to finish a book, and some of it works for a while if it works for you, like write 1,000 words a day, or get up at 5 a.m. and write your book every day for a year, or something like that. But really, if there was a sort of easy formula, I think more people would write books and less people would think about writing books or struggle with writing books. And so this talk is kind of everything that I've learned from writing my own books, and also from working with writers who are completing their books, and really trying to be helpful and noticing all of the things that we struggle with and how we can move through them.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about how there's so many different ways that you can approach writing a book, and everyone has their kind of little pithy saying about what writing a book is like, right? But how would you describe that process of writing a book?
I think that particularly in the process of writing my first book, Leaving India, My Family's Journey from 5 Villages to 5 Continents, it was a big project. It was about my family. It was very personal, and I struggled a lot with it. So I think when I was in the middle of it, I would have described it as just sort of a hellish kind of snake pit, like, don't do this. But having now a couple of other books behind me as well, I think one way that I think about it is that it's kind of like climbing a mountain. Each mountain is a little bit different. But there's something amazing once you are able to do it. I'm assuming, not that I've ever actually climbed a mountain, so climbed little hills. But I think that that's how I've come to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting analogy. And why don't we just dive into this talk so we can learn a little bit more about what this mountain actually looks like?
Sure. So if you want to follow along, you can draw this sort of, this is a little bit about our organization. So maybe we should introduce ourselves, actually.
I guess we could do that again.
We could do that. So the Unicorn Authors Club is a place online that we meet as authors of color and what I call allies who really mean it, to finish our books. And we do that through a range of things, including individual coaching and group coaching, as well as a whole bunch of other kinds of events and co-writing sessions and craft talks and curriculum. So that's what we do together.
Yeah, we're dancing around our presentation a little bit, but yes, now that we know who we are, let's talk about this mountain.
Let's talk about this mountain. So if you want to follow along, if you're that sort of person, then you could draw this spiral and follow along and take notes. And we are also happy to send you a copy of this slideshow so you don't have to take meticulous notes. And if you want a copy, you can just email us at hello@unicornauthors.club. But for now, we're gonna go to the next slide and take a look. So this spiral kind of represents the mountain. There's you over on the left, you're the unicorn, and there way up at the top of the mountain is your book. And look, it's amazing, it's done. It's open, someone could read it. And if you are just looking at this as a flat image, you think, oh, it's flat. I could just walk right over to the mountain top. But of course, as we know, you can't really climb just straight up the face of a mountain. So often you're going on this kind of winding path around until you can reach the summit. So that's the analogy that we're working with. And as we look at where this journey starts, usually it starts with, over on the left, an idea or ideas, right? So you think about your book and you suddenly find yourself at the bottom of this mountain. You've got an idea, you've got a couple ideas, and then maybe the next thing that leads to is a burst of writing. And then as you're writing, you sort of realize, oh, I need to kind of learn some things. So you're on this now suddenly learning journey. Maybe you need to learn more about your topic. Maybe you need to learn some skills to write a book. Maybe you want to learn about the publishing process. And it sort of continues on this path. And as you're writing, as you're learning, you have more ideas, your book takes shape, and then you sort of, your life starts to kind of reshape a little bit around the book, right? Maybe you're clearing now more time in your schedule, you're feeling more committed, maybe you're developing a community, either of writers or of people who are involved in your book, subjects, maybe readers even. And you might find yourself doing more specific research or craft study. You might find, oh, instead of I need to learn everything about my topic, actually there are some little holes in my knowledge now, or I want to learn about dialogue. And as you're continuing, your book gets fleshed out. So you have more of an idea of the time period and the time frame of your book, the specific place, the characters, the themes, everything starts to bubble up. And ideally, then you're in a state of flow with your book. You're building momentum. Maybe your confidence is growing as you know more, and you're developing more technique, more clarity about how you're actually writing your book. Maybe you're learning revision. You're starting to see the difference between the original work that you did in your first burst of writing and what you're doing later in your process, and you realize, I want to go back and revise. And then somehow, finally, through all of that, you reach the end. Ta-da! And so that's the process. There you are with your book finished. And then sneakily, you can see that I have organized this journey into 3 broad categories, which is how I think about the process of writing the book. So one area is the story. And the story is really what is in your book, what's the content of your book, who's in there, when is it, where are the places, what are the plot decisions that you need to make, or if you're writing a memoir, a nonfiction book, what are the key events that are shaping the narrative arc of your book. Those are all kind of story questions and story development issues. Then over on the right, you see we're talking about skills. So these are, what are the things that you need to learn in order to do justice to your story? They might be writing skills, they might be research. It's really about what are you pulling in to support the story. And then underneath, and what I kind of think about as the underpinning of all of this is your writing process, which we call, in the Unicorn Authors Club, we call it Sanctuary. And this is where we talk about what's going on in your process. How can your process support you writing the book and also be sustainable for you as a writer?
Well, you've made this sound very easy, Meenal, but I think we all know if we've ever sat down to write that it's not nearly as black and white. But I'm wondering if you could lay out like what is the ideal scenario of approaching this mountain? Is it a linear process or is there things that we should be kind of pinpointing specifically as we go through the process? What does it look like?
Yeah, it's definitely, in my experience, it's definitely not a linear process. It's a lot of kind of sliding around the circle, for sure. And one thing that I think about is that it's helpful for me to kind of have that look at the map. And I do think of that spiral as a map so that I can just sort of see where I am and what might need to happen next. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But it's definitely true that there are a lot of obstacles that can come up. And one of the things you do, Rachel, is you do sanctuary coaching. So what are some of the obstacles that you find that writers encounter in particularly the sanctuary area?
Well, sanctuary is the area that people kind of put on the back burner, I think. So when we sit down to write a book, we can be very task oriented about it. I have to, as you said, write these many words or complete these many pages, or, we set a timeline for when we want to complete our work, not really thinking about how we're taking care of ourselves in the process, whether we're working in a space that's conducive to our writing, whether we have the kind of support that we need to keep us going, if that looks like having a writing group that you check in with, or just a partner that you check in with. Also thinking about taking time to process what we're writing, especially for writers who are writing nonfiction or who are writing in that memoir space. You can be pulling up a lot of stuff that you personally went through. And if you're not taking the time to take care of yourself as a person in the process of writing that, it can present itself as an obstacle. So one of the things that, Sanctuary provides is just that. It's a space to create an environment that's conducive to writing, and also to create supports that you need, whether it's people or resources, so that you can get through some of those really kind of hinky parts of your book. But we know that there are other obstacles that come up, and you do one-on-one coaching with folks as far as their writing is concerned. So I'm wondering what kinds of obstacles you see when you're doing your coaching with folks on their books.
Yeah, well, what you just mentioned is definitely something that happened for me. I really thought I had come from a journalism background, and then I had written a proposal which sold and got bought by a publisher. So then I had a publishing contract, and I thought, oh well, it's it's 100,000 words, so that's kind of like 10,000 word articles, and I'll just write them one by one. And I did not at all account for how emotional the writing would be, how much intergenerational trauma would be involved, how much therapy and yoga and meditation I would need along the way, as well as other kinds of help and support. And I was really blocked on that book. And in the process of being myself blocked and then coming out of those very sort of severe blocks, I tried a lot of things, um, and one of the biggest things that I had to overcome was the feeling that I should be able to do this. I should know how to do this myself. And it was really great to start realizing, oh, actually, I don't know how to do this. And other people do. Other people have some insight. And it can be great to have writer friends and a writing group and a coach. And so some of the things that happen in coaching are, and the obstacles that come up are really in all three of the areas, the kind of story skills and sanctuary areas, um, and part of it is how we actually deal with the problems that do arise, because eventually in any kind of book that has some depth, there are going to be problems. There are going to be, and those problems are serious questions. So let's maybe take a look at the next set of slides, because one way of dealing with with this process of writing a book is that we go, okay, here's our kind of, landscape, what we got to do. That was the ideal way. We just progressed smoothly all the way up the mountain. But really, what does it look like? And so what is in the way? And this is something that if y'all are watching, you could take a moment also and pause the recording and think about, what's in the way of any of these for you personally. And one thing that we do is we go to our toolbox and we take out, like we think, okay, I'm gonna take on this big project, and we take out our tool, and our tool is a hammer sometimes. And when we have a hammer, of course, we start pounding in nails. So then we go, okay, I'm going to hammer away at my story, and I'm going to work on my skills. I'm just going to nail it. Everything's going to be perfect. And I'm going to nail down my writing ritual. So I'm going to write in these periods of time and light this candle, and then just magically the story is going to flow. And you probably have all heard this saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And, we sort of are talking about this in a lighthearted way, but actually it's really difficult when you're in it. So one thing that can happen in the story area is the sensation of working but not getting anywhere, having multiple drafts that kind of conflict with each other, don't seem to go together, confusion. This is the time period when someone would ask me how my book was, and I would say, oh, it's a mess. It's a mess. So you might have said that too about your own book. And we think, oh, maybe this project is just impossible. And then in the skills area, sometimes we think, well, okay, maybe the book is fine, but maybe I'm not good enough because I can see that the quality is uneven. Uneven quality is actually very normal in a first draft. But if we don't know what to do with that, or maybe we're workshopping too early, so we're getting mixed feedback, unhelpful feedback, or the feedback is good, or maybe even our own assessment is accurate of the work, but we just don't know how to improve it. Then we go, okay, the book's fine, but I'm just not good enough. I suck. So that's painful. And then sometimes it can come in the sanctuary area, right? So all of this angst about the story and skills can show up as avoidance of the project. I set aside a writing time, but then I got to do laundry at that time or something else happens. Blocks, procrastination. Sometimes it can become just this general angst about life. And we think, oh, maybe I should, maybe just whatever, maybe the book's fine, the skills are terrible, and just this whole endeavor is not worthwhile. I might as well take up croquet. What is the meaning of doing any of this?
Oh
So that's something that can happen. And again, I'm laughing now, but I have been there. I definitely had a period, again, with my first book where I gave myself a certain amount of time to think about whether I was going to just not do it, just somehow pay back the advance, which I'd already spent on my rent, but maybe over a period of years I could pay it back. And what would it look like to just abandon the project? And that was a really important thing to go through for me, and led me to recommit to it. But I do think it's important to really allow oneself to feel what's going on in the process, and to see, am I trying to work with a hammer when I need actually something else?
Yeah, I love that you give us this image of the hammer because it's so immediate, right? We kind of all felt this feeling of taking something that we've been so meticulous about putting together, and then that criticism comes in, whether it's the inner critic or whether it's the outer critic, and we just want to tear it all apart. But why does that happen? Why is it that we can start with so much passion for a project that we know so well, and then begin to dismantle it in sometimes a very toxic way?
Yeah, I think that a part of it is that we are in this very sort of isolationist, white supremacist culture where we have values like perfectionism and doing things our own way and thinking, oh, we've got to, we've got to um, kind of figure it out all on our own. Yeah, there's our slide. I think it's actually the one before that. This is an exercise that we have done with our authors in the Unicorn Authors Club. And some of the things that we do as we're working with particularly authors of color, but also white writers, I think really suffer from this, is we really try to unpack how do white supremacy culture, capitalism, and all of these unhealthy patterns enter our writing process in each of these areas. So sometimes we develop a sense that, and these are ideas that are brainstormed from various people during an exercise. It's a little messy to read, but I'll read out some of them. If my book is not perfect, it sucks. Difficulty starting, difficulty finishing, getting the story right, feeling like I need the whole story before I can write, feeling I must remember everything correctly. I think that was from a memoir writer. Holding on to ideas that that if I had the right skills, I would figure out my story faster. Obsessive researching, doubting my own work, focusing on work that is not done rather than what is done, doubt of not knowing enough, not celebrating what has been accomplished, only what's missing, really critical and judgmental of myself rather than remembering wins. I wrote 20,000 words and didn't celebrate that feat. So these are some of the things the types of things that can weigh us down. And if you're watching this and some of this is resonating, you might again take a moment to pause the recording and write down what are some ways that perfectionism in particular is poisoning or slowing down your own process. And then together we brainstormed some antidotes to this. So in the next slide, we have some of the antidotes that folks thought of. How might we apply antidotes to liberate our writing? And some of those are funny. They're like, force myself to celebrate successes. And it's
I
funny
love
that
that.
should be a force, right? But it is when we're trying to really change patterns and habits. And be honest with myself about challenges so that I don't keep pushing against the wall of me. Take time to learn and dream and envision a culture of learning, which I love because that's really, I think, what we need as writers. We need to give ourselves the space to learn to write the book as we're writing the book. And I do think there are some things that are particular about the first book that you write that are the hardest, but actually each book is its own little structure and its own beast. So there's always learning. And the learning is kind of what's great about being a writer. And it's easy to forget that when we get really immersed into productivity mode. So again, if you're watching this, you might think about some things that are your forces of your factors of resilience and that could bring some joy back into your writing process. And this is really where we're heading toward, is how can we be free? How can you liberate your content, your story from any ideas of what you think your story should be? Sometimes this gets phrased as a kind of conversation about genre, like, oh, I think I should be writing a young adult book, but really I want to go into these kind of riskier territories that are not supposed to be in young adult or something like that. Or, oh, I should be fair to my mother, but really I'm very angry and my memoir is about that anger. So liberating your content is one place. Skills, this is a really important one, especially for writers who come from non-traditional educational backgrounds. Sometimes there's a feeling that, oh, I can't, I'm not a good speller, so that means I'm a bad writer. Well, spelling is kind of the least of it. So you can write your whole book with very bad spelling and then someone can help and fix that. There can also be more profound things, like some people feel the kind of dialogue and vocabulary that they grew up with is not sufficient. And it often turns out that they are amazing at capturing character and personality through conversation. And if you write in the way that it comes to you, everyone has a voice, and it's actually the process of um, trying to fix or uh, normalize or assimilate your own voice is often what leads to bad writing and to kind of flat, uninteresting writing. And so often we're looking at what do you what do you really do well, and how can you feel more free to do what you do well and build your book around that, around the things that you do well, instead of trying to become a writer who's great at every aspect of writing. And then in Sanctuary, we're talking really about how do you liberate your process? How do you free yourself from voices of the past, voices of the inner critics, doubts and fears? And again, in none of these areas are we aiming for perfection. We're really just aiming for enough, right? So it's not like you have to work through all of your trauma and all of your family's trauma in order to write your book. You just need to work through enough to keep moving, a little bit at a time. And the writing can be part of that work. So here are some prompts, and these are meant to be kind of generative prompts, to think about how to move forward and how to really just take that next step in writing your book. In the area of story, I think about how um, what do I really, the only question for the story area that's important is what do I write next? And part of that can be, well, what do I most need to figure out? Especially at the beginning, probably I need to figure out everything about my book. But what's the one thing that would be helpful to figure out in order for me to write the next thing? And part of that question can be, well, what do I already know? And that can be kind of um, a really useful thing, because sometimes we get really absorbed by what we don't know and all the uncertainty, and we forget that we actually do have some strong ideas or aesthetics about our story. So, what do I know about my story? What do I most need to figure out? Knowing that you don't have to figure out all of it at the same time. And what do I write next? And really, that question, what do I write next, is what has helped me the most, because it's a day by day kind of question. You can ask it every single day that you're sitting down to write. And you only have to figure out one thing and then write that thing. And then the question is still there. What do I write next? And then what do I write next? And that can take you all the way to the end of your first draft of your book. Um, in the skills area, it's really important to identify what do I already do brilliantly. And if you don't know, this is where your writing group and writer friends can help you, because you probably already do something wonderfully. And then you could look at, well, what would help me level up? Where's something that I would be excited to learn? And I know the difference for myself between um, a kind of skills building that is going to be generative and positive, and a kind of skills building or skills self-critiquing, really, that is not, because it's in the energy of it. So if I'm learning something, then I get excited to take a class in that, or I get excited to talk to somebody about that, or I get excited to do a writing exercise and experiment with that. If it's a kind of negative, deficiency based approach to my own skills, then I go, oh, I suck. I'm never going to be able to write this book because I'm not a historian, or I don't have training in social science or something like that. And then it puts a kind of cloud over the whole project. So look for those areas of skills that feel energizing and exciting for you. And then ask, how do I learn best, and who can help me? Because not every class, not every way of learning is for everybody. And then in the sanctuary area, the kind of baseline is, how can I make it safe for myself to write. One exercise that I find really helpful for this is if you're really blocked, you really have a lot of negativity happening in your writing, then I suggest having two pages of your notebook or two documents side by side open on your screen. And in one of them, just start writing really anything, doesn't matter. Maybe a paragraph of your book or something about how your day went or something. And on the other side, the other document, start writing what the inner voices are saying, what the inner critics are saying. And for me, the first time that I did this, I think I ended up with like 3 or 4 sentences on the left-hand side, and then like 3 pages on the other side. And really, really terrible stuff that I was saying to myself every time that I was sitting down to write. You know, everything from sort of like, who are you to dare to write about your family, to you're too fat, no one's going to want to look at your authored picture, what's the point? So there's a lot in there, and so after doing that, it's good to take a break, maybe have a good cry out, and then come back to it and go, well, where are these voices coming from, and how can I neutralize them? What can I say back to them? What kind of support do I need? How can I examine those? How can I disarm them? And because and to have a lot of compassion for yourself in that process, because often if you're stuck, if you're blocked, there's probably some really difficult stuff that you are dealing with. A lot of times writers come to me as a coach and they say, oh, well, you know, my problem is that I'm lazy. And I really don't believe that. I think lazy people don't volunteer to do extra work for no money. That's probably not what's going on. Probably you're dealing with something difficult, and that's why some of those behaviors that we talked about, like procrastination and avoidance, are coming up, because we're actually trying to protect ourselves from the harm that might be occurring in our own writing process. And then once we reach that baseline of safety, or maybe your process is not so terrible, then we look at maybe how can we make it fun? How could it be pleasurable to write? How could writing become the part of my day that I look forward to and enjoy, rather than just another burden? And again, for each of these, we're really not looking for perfection. We're looking for what's the minimum that I need to figure out in order to progress to the next part of the spiral, in order to keep climbing up the mountain toward the beautiful thing at the summit that I'm excited to approach. So this part, we're sort of talking about using the whole toolbox rather than the just the hammer. And this slide has some suggestions for things that can be positive to work on and to explore for each part of the story skills and sanctuary framework. We won't go in depth into this now, but just to help you kind of have ideas and think about what you might try. And some of this is what we go into in depth when we work with authors in the Unicorn Authors Club.
Yeah, thanks for laying that out so beautifully, Nino. And what I love about the image of the spiral is it does take us out of that linear idea of thinking and kind of get us to see that all of these things happen along the path in different ways at different times. And it's just a wonderful approach to the whole process of being a writer, being a person, creating something that you're putting out into the world that, you know, you have a lot of passion about, but also there are other things that that come along with presenting your work to the world. And so I'm wondering, like, we've seen the roadmap, we have an idea of what it looks like, and you've given us really great tools. So what are some closing ideas that you want to leave writers with that are entering into the space of writing a full book, and maybe looking for some just kind of tidbit of encouragement?
Yes. Well, I think what you just said, Rachel, is really important, that it's about not just being a writer, but being a person. I know that for myself, before I started writing a book, I kind of had this approach to writing that was very much about individual pieces. So whether it was a poem or a piece of journalism, there was sort of this arc that each one followed. Like, here's the idea, here's the draft, here's the kind of revision and editing, and then it's done, and then it starts in the publication process, and that happened fairly quickly. Like even in a long-term cycle, maybe it'd be a few weeks or a few months, and it was possible to kind of keep that a little bit separate. Like I could live my whole life and then do that kind of work. A book has a way of taking over your life if you let it, um, and there are periods when you do. I find that I do want to devote all of my time and to the book, and I actually really like that kind of immersive approach. But a book takes years usually to write, and so you can't just like put your whole life aside to write the book for years and years. So it is about integrating the book into your life and making it sustainable and making it not a complete drain on the rest of your life, but ideally also being something that is great and that's giving meaning and pleasure to one's life. So I think in terms of sort of just quick quick tidbits, I would say to if this approach resonates with you, then to go back through slowly and see where where do I need the most support or the most change. I sort of think of these areas as red, yellow, green, and so if if things are mostly pretty good, I feel good about my skills, let's say, then I might say that's the green area. And then maybe my story is very fuzzy and confused. So maybe that's a red area. And then maybe my process is a little bit of both. So maybe I go, oh, that's a yellow area. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. And then I say, really focus on what are your kind of red and green areas and let them support each other. So if I know, oh, my skills are pretty good, I think my skills are up to snuff. So that's a green area, then that strength is something that I can take over to my story and I can go, well, I know a lot about writing. So how can I use that to support my story? And what specifically in my skills area am I good at? Like for me, for instance, I'm really good at big picture um, plot and structure. And so that can be really great to know because then I can go, oh, I work with other people on book structure a lot. So let me see what are some tools that I use for that that I could apply to my own story and see if I can parse that out, or that I could talk out with another person and say, sometimes I work with this particular time structure in a book and I'd like to try that out on my story. And can you talk through with me what would that look like for this particular story that I'm trying to tell? So I think it can be really helpful to just like lean into what you're really good at already or what you know well already. There are some folks who have a really solid, like you, Rachel, who have a really strong meditation and yoga practice. And I feel like you are able to use that as a strong ground to then support you in some of the places that you want to develop.
Oh, thanks for that. I feel like we've kind of dug into so many different really important tools to help folks that are writing books. And just to kind of go back through, we have the story skills sanctuary structure. We have these really great free write questions, which I hope you will go back and pause this and have a look and write them down and engage with them. I love the red light, green light, yellow light. And just keeping in mind that this is a process, right? That it's going to take time, that you don't have to finish your book tomorrow.
Yeah.
So just in closing, because we're getting towards the end here, we'll go to our thank you slide.
Yes. So check us out if you are writing a book and you want more support. Please feel free. We're always happy to have new members, and you can email us with any questions. And again, if you would like a copy of this presentation, we can email it to you. Just drop us a note at hello@unicornauthors.club. And you can also tag us on Instagram, etc. And thanks for your attention. And thank you, Rachel, for being such a great collaborator and friend and co-host.
Well, thank you, Mino. This has been absolutely wonderful. I took lots of notes. So we hope that we'll get to see and connect with you all on the interweb somewhere.
This concludes the 4 p.m. session of Track 3, Crafting Community, entitled How to Write a Book, Really. 1455 would like to again thank our sponsors and panelists for their support and participation in the 2022 1455 Summer Festival. In a moment, we will be ending the live stream. Before we go, we encourage you to check out and purchase books from today's speakers. Purchasing a book or two is a great way to support our authors and speakers who have donated their time to be here today, and to support a local independent bookstore. Please visit the 1455 website at 1455litarts.org/summerfest-books, where you'll find a listing of books organized by author last name with links to purchase from our independent bookselling partner, the Potter's House. Finally, the Summer Festival doesn't end with this session. We encourage you to use the links above the screen to navigate back to the Attendee Hub and join one of our upcoming sessions, or check out any of our earlier sessions you may have missed that are available for on-demand viewing. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.